Hi there, my name's Samuel Boswell. I'm a business developer at OneClick LCA, and today I'm going to be running through the integration between the OneClick LCA plugin and Autodesk Revit. And so before I begin, I want to quickly point out that we do have an abundance of resources where you can delve into a little bit more detail than what I'll be running through in this demo about the Revit integration. And so to access this, you simply go to the resources tab on the OneClick LCA website, and you can then navigate your way to the OneClick LCA Academy, where not only do we have information on the OneClick LCA integration here, but we also have a number of other courses that you can access about everything to do with lifecycle assessment and EPDs. And so in this particular course, we run through things like modeling guidances and considerations, but also we have a very detailed overview of every single aspect of the plugin. And so to download the OneClick LCA plugin, you just come to the Autodesk website, click download, and then the installation process is very straightforward. So once it's installed, you will have a new tab along the top ribbon of Revit. And if I click on here, we can see we've got three buttons. So the first one is help. And so if I click on this, it will take us to the customer support center, where it will tell us anything related to the Revit integration. So you've got a little bit more information there. But then we have the other two buttons. And so the first one is LCA and Cloud. And what this will do is it will take all of the information from your Revit model, and that would be either the material names, the family type names, and also the dimensional information, and then begin the import process of all that data back to the main OneClick LCA software. So alternatively, we can click on LCA and Cloud, LCA and Autodesk Revit, and this will mean that we can adjust a certain number of parameters before we import it back to the main software, but at the same time, it can also be used while you're actually designing. And so it gives you that ability to see what or map materials from the OneClick database to your Revit models, Revit model materials or family types, and see what sort of impacts those are going to be. And so we can see that we've now got this new window that's appeared. We've got four buttons across the top. So again, we've got LCA and Cloud. We also have the help button, and then we've also got save and refresh. And so one of the latest additional features of the plugin is that we have the file tab. And so here we can actually save any settings that we apply within this window. We can also save as, and then we can also reload them, or we can just reset them all. And so this saves a lot of time and prevents you from having to kind of start from scratch each time you're actually doing a model. Probably the most important one to start with is, of course, login. So logging in is going to get you going. But then the first kind of main tab would be settings. And so here we can choose what sort of data we want to be searching through in the OneClick database. We can specify what language this window here is speaking in. And then we've also got some additional Revit parameters that we can apply. So if there is any cost data within your Revit model, you can actually specify that this cost data parameter is then applied to any lifecycle costing analysis that we might be doing. Another tab is that, another field is that we've got one for user classification. So if your organization or yourself has a specific way of classifying your materials that you would prefer to analyze the data against, then you can actually specify that, which parameter within the Revit model. The next one is the scope. So this is where we just choose what parts of the model we do and don't include. And then below that, we've got the other settings. And so here we've got the default material grouping mode. And this is probably one of the most relevant aspects as to how the model or how the plugin is actually reading the data coming from your Revit model. So we've got two options. The first one is to split the family types into their individual materials. And so this is good for more detailed models, because then we can apply a material from the OneClick database to the materials within your family types. But alternatively, if you have a lower level of detailed model, then we can actually keep those family types grouped together and apply materials to those instead. And when I say materials, it can either be an individual material, but alternatively, what you can apply are what are called constructions within the OneClick LCA database. And so a construction is simply made up of multiple materials. And so therefore, you don't actually have to have a huge level of detail within your model. because the one-click LCA database will essentially fill in all that information that you might not necessarily have. So you're not having to apply information on every single nut and bolt that's going to go into your project. This kind of data can actually be filled in by the use of constructions. The next tab we have, the next field is for units. That's quite self-explanatory. So whether it's metric or imperial. And then below that, we've got whether we want to ignore 2D objects such as paint materials. And so the following tab from the options is the export additional parameters. And this is where we can choose from type parameters, shared parameters, or material parameters within a Revit model that we might want to also include. And so, for example, I can actually choose the cost data here that might be in the Revit model and come back to here. And when I click the drop down for the LCC data that we want to apply, you can just select that there. The next sub tab is the element scope grouping. And so this is filled in all by default, but what this is doing is we're specifying which part of the scope we want to include each category coming from our Revit model. Okay, so the next tab is for models, and here we can select between the active view, so everything that the interface can actually see. We can also choose from the selected elements within the model, so maybe we only want to analyze a couple of pieces. I can then choose those and the analysis will only be run on them. But then we have the detailed configuration. And so this is if you have different design phases, different design options, or any linked models, you can choose which of those you do and don't include in the analysis. Moving on from that, we've got the detailed scope. And so this is where we can really zoom into what we actually, what parts of the model we want to include. So the first box is simply showing us what model we're working on or what project. And then below that, we've got the categories. And so we can choose any of the categories that we may not want to include. So for example, mass, I might not want to include, maybe also furniture systems and furniture I don't want to include either. And then also we can actually, again, choose whether we want to split the materials into their individual, split the family types into their individual materials, or whether we want to keep them grouped together. So this is great because, say, for example, maybe our doors are quite low level of detail. So actually, maybe I want to keep them grouped together and only apply materials to their actual family type names instead of all the individual materials within those doors. The next window over here, we can go into a little bit more detail. So we can actually click on the category and then we'll see all the different objects within the Revit model within that category. And from there, we can again choose whether we do or don't include them, or whether we want to also split them. So if there are, maybe you've got a mixture of walls, some high level detail, some low level detail, you can really choose. You have complete flexibility to specify how that data is going to be involved. So the next one is the materials tab. And so on here, we've got a number of buttons at the top, which I'll come back to. And then below that, we've got a filter, a search bar, and then a kind of viewport where we can see all the materials from the one-click LCA database. And so this is really how the software is working, is that you're reading the materials, the material names within your Revit model, but also family types, as I've mentioned, and you're mapping materials from the one-click database to those material names or family type names. And so this is a kind of condensed down version of the building material query in the main software. I can use the filter to refine the search. I can also search certain things like concrete and stuff like that, and then I'll have the whole list here. The section below that is then the project materials. And so these are the materials that are being picked up from the Revit model. And so I can scroll down. Let's say I come to exterior walls. We can see we've got the category name, the family name, the type name, and then the specific material. And so these ones, we can see there's a wooden stud layer there. If I scroll along, we then have the one-click LCA mapping. Of course, there's nothing that's been mapped at this stage to any parts of the model. And then we've got the units, we've got a multiplier as well, and then all of the dimensional information, so quantities, thicknesses, volumes, areas, and so on, and also the number of pieces. So this is, the software is not actually, or sorry, the plugin's not going to be changing any of the physical modeling or parameters of your Revit model. The way it works is it kind of sits on top of it, reads what's going on, and then you apply the the data to that, to what's being read. So it's kind of almost on the surface of it, and so it's not making any kind of physical changes to your actual model. And so what I could do here is maybe search for a wooden stud layer and then double click it, and it will apply the material there. So this is good if you're doing if you're in the design process and you want to test some things, or you can simply map the whole thing. But what we also have is, if I click this refresh button up here, what it will do is automatically it will read all of the material names and family type names, and it will map a material from the one-click database which it thinks is the most appropriate. And so the method it does this, I will come on to a bit later. This is to do with the mapping basis. But for now, I will just run through what these buttons mean across the top. So the first one is update LCA database. This simply means to update the data that's being picked up from the one-click LCA database. We can refresh materials here, and this is refreshing the materials being detected in the Revit model. We can clear filters, show data card to highlight a little bit more information or a little bit more detail about each of these data points. And then we have these two useful ones here, which is find element from 3D. So say, for example, I want to search where this roof item is within this section here. So I can click that, and then it will give me all the materials that are within that family type. But alternatively, I can do it the other way around. So say, for example, I want to search for doors. I scroll down and choose one of these and then click isolate in 3D. It's going to show me all the doors relevant to that item within the project materials. Okay, so now if we come back to, say, exterior walls, we can see that under the tab of one-click LCA mappings, we've actually got materials that have now been mapped to our model there. And so that means when I can come into, well, when I come into the results tab, which is following that, I again have a similar interface. I've got some similar buttons, but you can see I've got all the different project material categories. And so under exterior walls, we can see all the materials that are involved with that. And if I scroll a little bit further along, and we can also see the material that's been mapped. If I scroll a bit further along, we can actually see how many tons of embodied carbon have been produced, what percentage of the total project it makes up, and then the impact quintile. So the impact quintile are the kind of 20% bands, whether it's low impact, high, low, medium, and high. And then we also have the intensity, so kilograms of embodied carbon per meters cubed. And so we then have an intensity quintile. So two additional buttons that are very useful for visualizing this data is we can highlight the model based off the absolute quintile. So here it's showing where the main impact areas are coming from, but we can also do the same for intensity. So that's what that looks like. This is what the data looks like. As you can see, this would also be very useful for not only kind of taking that data back to the one-click software where you can start producing the more detailed reports and producing the more detailed graphs, but you can actually produce very nice diagrams of what the impact areas of the building look like, but also you can use it in a design phase where you can quickly see what the impacts will be. So the next tab is chart, and so this is just showing us the most impactful materials. We can see what percentage they are. Again, very useful for doing it during the design phase. And then the last tab is for the benchmark. And so here we're using the one-click LCA Carbon Heroes benchmark, which was it's been built in a way where we've taken projects that have been done on the one-click LCA software in specific countries and of certain building types, and then rank them against each other to see how they perform. So maybe the benchmark I want to use could be, I'll just stick with the UK for now. So we can specify what country it's in. I'll just click United Kingdom. We can specify a one dwelling building. And then I believe the floor area of this is about 750 meters squared. So when I click OK, you can see it updates there and we can see how it's performing. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of what the plugin can actually do. But following on from that, you can then click LCA in Cloud, as you could up there. But at this point, I've specified certain aspects that I do and don't want to include and how I want it to import the data. And that means it will then take all of that information and bring it back to the main software where we can then kind of work on it as if it's a normal project. Okay, so we now land on what we call the importing process page. And so it's a chronological process. It's quite straightforward. And the good thing about this is that if you're importing an Excel spreadsheet, or if you're importing an Excel spreadsheet, or if you're using virtually any other integration, the process will be exactly the same as how you bring that data back to the main software. So for now, to save time, I'm going to skip these first 4 tabs, and the most important one is the mapping phase. So I'll let the defaults, or I'll let the software use the defaults for these ones. The first tab that we're on is the settings. And so here we can just choose which project we want to apply this to. So I'll use my UK demo, and we can specify whether we create a new design or I overwrite an existing one. So I'll use my Revit import for here. And then also we can choose the calculation tool. So for this, I'll use the standard UK tool, which is the RIX-GLA. We can specify what data we want to filter out and include. So if there's any particular certifications you're doing, it will give you guidance on what sort of thing that is. But I'll go for all data for now. And then also, because I'm updating an existing project, I can either replace the data, add to it, or just update the quantities. And so for now, I'll just replace everything. And so when I click continue, it's going to give me a warning that I'm about to overwrite a project. So of course, that's useful if that's not something you want to do. In this case, I do. And now it will skip through these sections and land on the mapping stage. So classify is just where we're specifying which classes from the Revit model go into the classes within the one-click software. Filter, we're choosing what parts we do and don't want to include. I've already set that up in the Revit model, so I'm okay with what's going through. And then combine is if we want to combine or ungroup any information. And then review is useful because you go back over these 3 sections for each individual data point. But at the same time, you also will get a report telling you if there's any likely errors. So this is quite useful if you've never done this before, because it will give you some guidance on what parts of the Revit model are likely to be wrong. And so therefore you can kind of go back and address those and make sure that everything's importing properly. Okay, so we've now landed on the mapping section. We've got a filter across the top here, which is the same that's on the building material input query for the main software. And then below that, we've got one drop-down menu. This is good. It's telling us that it's identified 73 objects, and then that's 100% volume of the building. This, if there was any data that hadn't been identified, or it was problematic data, and there was a way that the software wasn't able to automatically map a material from the one-click database to the material from the Revit model, then it will give you this warning, and it will say, this is how many data points haven't been mapped, and this is what percentage of the volume is of the building. And so at that point, you can then tell the software what materials you do want to map to them. And so if I click this drop down, we can see we've got a number of different fields. And so there's or a number of different columns. We've got the material name, we've got the class, we've got the comment, there's the RIX category, company classification, we've got the quantity, percentage share of the building, and then of course we've got the resource name. So the resource name is the resource, or is the material from the one-click database, and then the material over here is the name that was in the Revit model. So if I see here, we've got CL concrete panels, and so what's been applied is a ready-mix concrete C40 to 50. And so if I'm not happy with this, I can always search through other alternatives that the software thinks that it could be. But also I can choose from the entire database, use the filter, and then apply my own mapping. And so the next thing is the mapping basis. And so the mapping basis comes down to a number of different aspects. You can see that there's a lot of these things that have been mapped in the model in the past, but there's a number of different ways that the mapping basis, and this is essentially how the software chooses what to map to the resources coming from the model. So the first 2 would be your mapping, and then a similar one to that would be a colleague mapping. And so what this means is that either you or a colleague has mapped that material before, they've then checked the box for save new mappings, or they've clicked this button up here, and the software has then remembered this, and you've taught the software that when it reads this specific material name from your Revit model, it maps this specific material from the one-click database. And so therefore you can actually speed up the process quite well over time, because the software will learn what sort of things you actually want to be mapping. So next time you import something, it's going to be much faster because you're not having to specify this stuff. But alternatively, if it can't find anything that way, We will then search for users in the same location as the project. So in this case, United Kingdom, and then it kind of expands that search until it reaches a kind of global level. And then, of course, if it can't find anything that way, because maybe you've used a material that's been named like a code or something like that, and it's never been mapped before, then the software is going to tell you and ask you to map something. So at this stage, you are probably going to go through and sort of you can check what sort of things have been mapped and if you're okay with them. And once you're happy with it, you would just simply click continue, and then it will bring you onto the results section of this imported model. And you can then start looking through what the kind of impacts are of the various different aspects of the building. So that's really it for the Revit integration, how it works, how you bring that data back to the main software. And I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Again, if you want to find out more, feel free to get in touch. Maybe you are already in touch with someone, but I myself would be more than happy to go through this in more detail with you as well. So thank you.